A new chapter, a family divided. How Jana and Stephen's love story is challenging Duggar tradition. When the first whispers emerged about Jana Duggar stepping into a serious relationship, fans who had followed the Duggar family for years could hardly believe it. Jana, the eldest daughter who for so long had been known as the ever-patient caretaker of her siblings and nieces and nephews, the one who quietly watched as nearly all her younger sisters married before her, was finally stepping into a new season of life. For years, speculation swirled about why Jana was still single, with some critics even suggesting that her parents, Jim Bob and Michelle, had quietly discouraged her from pursuing marriage because they relied so heavily on her at home. Through it all, Jana remained graceful, smiling through the rumors, supporting her family, and rarely offering more than a polite acknowledgement when asked about her own future. But when Stephen's name first surfaced in connection with hers, the energy around Jana's story shifted instantly. The quiet woman who had become almost symbolic of Duggar restraint and obedience was suddenly stepping into love on her own terms, and the result has been a mixture of hope, joy, controversy, and deep family tension that no one could have fully anticipated. Stephen was not the typical Duggar suitor. Unlike many of the other young men who entered the Duggar orbit through tightly controlled family introductions and closely monitored courtships, Stephen's presence felt different from the beginning. Friends of Jana suggested that she met him in a setting that was not orchestrated by Jim Bob, and that alone was enough to set him apart. He was a man of faith, but he carried himself with an independence that contrasted sharply with the rigid expectations the Duggar patriarch often imposed on those around him. To Jana, Stephen represented not just the possibility of marriage, but the possibility of carving out a space where she could finally be herself, a partner who saw her as more than a sister, more than a daughter, more than the dependable Duggar who never wavered. Their connection grew quietly, away from the spotlight at first, and for a woman whose entire adult life had been lived in front of cameras and whispers, that privacy was both refreshing and revolutionary. As their relationship deepened, however, the contrast between Jana's desires and her family's traditions began to sharpen. The Duggars had built their brand on the idea that marriage, courtship, and child-rearing followed a predictable formula, one rooted in strict religious guidelines and the oversight of Jim Bob as the patriarch. But Jana's relationship with Stephen did not fit neatly into that mold. Reports surfaced that she pushed back against the idea of her father controlling every detail of her courtship, insisting instead on spending time with Stephen without the constant presence of chaperones. For the Duggars, this was more than a minor rebellion. It was a direct challenge to the structures that had defined their family for decades. For fans, it was thrilling, a sign that Jana was finally finding her own voice. For her family, however, it was troubling, perhaps even dangerous, because it threatened the narrative of obedience and order that Jim Bob so carefully crafted. The tension grew more visible as family gatherings became fraught with unspoken divisions. Some siblings quietly supported Jana, whispering their encouragement and applauding her bravery to take her own path. Jill and Jinger, who had already broken away in their own ways from the family's strict traditions, were said to be particularly supportive, offering Jana advice and reminding her that love is worth the struggle it often requires. Jessa, ever careful to balance loyalty to her parents with her bond to her siblings, reportedly avoided taking a firm stance, choosing instead to simply stand by Jana emotionally without publicly contradicting Jim Bob. But others, especially those still closely aligned with their parents, expressed skepticism about Stephen, with some even questioning his intentions. To them, Stephen represented change, and change was something the Duggar household had always resisted. Jim Bob himself did little to hide his displeasure. While careful not to directly attack Stephen, insiders noted that his subtle comments, controlling behavior, and occasional outbursts made clear his discomfort with Jana's independence. For a man who had successfully overseen the marriages of so many of his children, the idea that Jana might step outside of his authority struck at the core of his identity as patriarch. This was not just about one daughter's relationship to Jim Bob, It was about control, legacy, and maintaining the structure that had kept his family under his guidance for so long. And yet, despite the pressure, Jana pressed forward. Her love for Stephen, coupled with her growing desire to live life on her own terms, kept her rooted in the belief that this relationship was worth the cost. As the whispers of conflict grew louder, so did public fascination. Fans who had waited years for Jana to find love celebrated every small piece of news about her relationship, cheering her on from afar. Social media lit up with encouragement, with many expressing hope that Jana might finally escape the endless cycle of being just the helper in her parents' home. But alongside the support came criticism, often from those who still adhered to the Duggar family's worldview. They warned of the dangers of disobedience, of stepping outside the hedge of protection that Jim, Bob, and Michelle preached about so often. To them, Jana's independence was not admirable but dangerous, a slippery slope that could lead to heartbreak, sin, or even estrangement from her family. In the middle of it all was Jana herself, torn between love and loyalty, faith and freedom, family and self. Those close to her say that the weight of this decision has been immense, leaving her often in tears as she prays for guidance. She has always been a woman of faith, and for her, every choice is filtered through her belief in God's plan. Yet for perhaps the first time, she is realizing that God's plan may not always align with her father's control. The possibility of building a life with Stephen excites her, but the fear of losing her family, of disappointing her parents, haunts her. It is a heartbreaking tension that many women face, but for Jana, whose life has always been lived under public scrutiny, the stakes feel higher than ever. As time has passed, the relationship has moved toward greater seriousness. Reports suggest that Jana and Stephen have discussed marriage, though not without difficulty. The idea of stepping into marriage without her father's full blessing is nearly unthinkable in Duggar tradition, yet Jana seems willing to consider it. Stephen, for his part, has reportedly urged Jana to prioritize their relationship above all else, reminding her that their future must be built on their own choices, not her family's dictates. It is a perspective that thrills some fans but terrifies the Duggar inner circle, who see it as evidence that Stephen is pulling Jana away from them. The public now waits with bated breath to see what Jana will do. Will she marry Stephen and risk the wrath of her father? Will she choose family loyalty over personal happiness, once again sacrificing her own dreams for the sake of unity? Or will she find a way to balance the two, forging a new path that honors both her love and her legacy? Whatever choice she makes, it is clear that Jana is standing at a crossroads that could redefine not only her life, but also the future of the Duggar family itself. This love story is more than just a personal romance. It is a battle between tradition and change, between control and independence, between a father's grip and a daughter's longing to be free. Jana Duggar and Stephen's relationship may one day be remembered not only as a turning point for Jana herself, but as the moment when the Duggar family's carefully constructed world began to shift in ways no one could have foreseen. For now, what remains certain is that Jana's journey is no longer one of quiet obedience. It is a story of courage, love, and the painful but necessary pursuit of a life that is truly